Jonathan Swift. They are but few and mean-spirited that live in peace with all men. Tale of a Tub. Birrell, the great English essayist, remarks that, "Of writing books about Dean Swift there is no end. The reason is plain. Of no other prominent writer who has lived during the past 200 years do we know so much his life lies open to us in many books." Boswell did not write his biography, but Johnson did. Then followed whole schools of little fishes, some of whom wrote like whales. But among the works of genuine worth and merit, with Swift for a subject, we have Sir Walter Scott's 19 volumes and Lives by Craik, Mitford, Forster, Collins, and Leslie Stephen. The positive elements in Swift's character make him a most interesting subject to men and women who are yet on earth, for he was essentially of the earth earthy, and until we are shown that the earth is wholly bad, we shall find much to amuse, much to instruct, much to admire, aye, much to pity, in the life of Jonathan Swift. His father married at 20. His income matched his years. It was just £20 per annum. His wife was a young girl, bright, animated, intelligent. In a few short months, this girl carried in her arms a baby. This baby was wrapped in a tattered shawl and cried piteously from hunger, for the mother had not enough to eat. She was cold and sick and in disgrace. Her husband, too, was ill and sorely in debt. It was midwinter. When spring came and the flowers blossomed, and the birds mated, and warm breezes came whispering softly from the south, and all the earth was glad, the husband of this child-wife was in his grave, and she was alone. Alone? No, she carried in her tired arms the hungry babe, and beneath her heart she felt the faint flutter of another life. But to be in trouble and in Ireland is not so bad after all, for the Irish people have great and tender hearts, and even if they have not much to bestow in a material way, they can give sympathy, and they do. So the girl was cared for by kind kindred, and on November 30th, 1667, at number 7, Hoey's Court, Dublin, the second baby was born. Only a little way from Hoey's Court is St. Patrick's Cathedral. On that November day, as the tones from the clanging chimes fell on the weary senses of the young mother, there in her darkened room, little did she think that the puny bantling she held to her breast would yet be the dean of the great church whose bells she heard. And how could she anticipate a whisper coming to her from the far-off future, "Of writing books about your babe there is no end"? The man-child was given to an old woman to care for, and he had the ability, even then it seems, to win affection. The foster mother loved him, and she stole him away, carrying him off to England. Charity ministered to his needs. Charity gave him his education. When Swift was 21 years old, he went to see his mother. Her means were scanty to the point of hardship, but so buoyant was her mind that she used to declare that she was both rich and happy, and being happy she was certainly rich. She was a rare woman. Her spirit was independent, her mind cultivated, her manner gentle and refined, and she was endowed with a keen sense of humor. From her the son derived those qualities which have made him famous. No man is greater than his mother, but the sons of brave women do not always make brave men. In one quality, Swift was lamentably inferior to his mother. He did not have her capacity for happiness. He had wit, she had humor. We have seen how Swift's father sickened and died. The world was too severe for him, its buffets too abrupt, its burden too heavy, and he gave up the fight before the battle had really begun. This lack of courage and extreme sensitiveness are seen in the son, but so peculiar, complex, and wonderful is this web of life that our very blunders, weaknesses, and mistakes are woven in and make the fabric stronger. If Swift had possessed only his mother's merits without his father's faults, he would never have shaken the world with laughter, and we should never have heard of him. In her lowliness and simplicity, the mother of Swift was content. She did her work in her own little way. She smiled at folly, and each day she thanked heaven that her lot was no worse. Not so her son. He brooded in sullen silence. He cursed fate for making him a dependent, and even in his youth he scorned those who benefited him. This was a very human proceeding. Many hate, but few have a fine capacity for scorn. Their hate is so vehement that when hurled it falls short. Swift's scorn was a beautifully winged arrow, with a poisoned tip. Some who were struck did not at the time know it. His misanthropy defeated his purpose, thwarted his ambition, ruined his aims, and made his name illustrious. Swift wished for churchly preferment, but he had not the patience to wait. He imagined that others were standing in his way, and of course they were, for under the calm exterior of things ecclesiastic, there is often a strife, a jealousy, and a competition more rabid than in commerce. To succeed in winning a bishopric requires a sagacity as keen as that required to become a senator of Massachusetts or the governor of New York. The man bides his time, makes himself popular, secures advocates, lubricates the way, pulls the wires, and slides noiselessly into place. Swift lacked diplomacy. When matters did not seem to progress, he grew wrathful, seized his pen, and stabbed with it. But as he wrote, the ludicrousness of the whole situation came over him, and instead of cursing plain curses, he held his adversary up to ridicule. And this ridicule is so active, the scorn so mixed with wit, the shaft so finely feathered with truth, that it is the admiration of mankind. Vitriol mixed with ink is volatile. Then what? We just run Swift through a coarse sieve to take out the lumps of 17th century refuse, and then we give him to children to make them laugh. Surely no better use can be made of pessimists. Verily, the author of Gulliver wrote for one purpose, and we use his work for another. He wished for office, he got contempt, he tried to subdue his enemies, they subdued him, he worked for the present, and he won immortality. Said Heinrich Heine, prone on his bed in Paris, "The wittiest sarcasms of mortals are only an attempt at jesting when compared with those of the great author of the universe, the Aristophanes of heaven." Wise men over and over have wasted good ink and paper in bewailing Swift's malice and coarseness. But without these very elements which the wise men bemoan, Swift would be for us a cipher. Yet love is life and hate is death, so how can spite benefit? The answer is that in certain forms of germination, frost is as necessary as sunshine. So some men have qualities that lie dormant until the coldness of hate bursts the coarse husk of indifference. But while hate may animate, only love inspires. Swift might have stood at the head of the Church of England, but even so, he would be only a unit in a long list of names, and as it is, there is only one Swift. Mr. Talmage averred that not 10 men in America knew the name of the Archbishop of Canterbury until his son wrote a certain book entitled Dodo. In putting out this volume, young Benson not only gave us the strongest possible argument favoring the celibacy of the clergy, but at the same time, if Talmage's statement is correct, he made known his father's name. In all Swift's work, save the Journal to Stella, the animating motive seems to have been to confound his enemies. And according to the well-known line in that hymn sung wherever the Union Jack flies, we must believe this to be a perfectly justifiable ambition. But occasionally on his pages we find gentle words of wisdom that were meant evidently for love's eyes alone. There is much that is pure boyish frolic, and again there are clever strokes directed at folly. He has shot certain superstitions through with doubt, and in his manner of dealing with error he has proved to us a thing it were well not to forget, that pleasantry is more efficacious than vehemence. Let me name one incident by way of proof, the well-known one of Partridge, the almanac maker. This worthy cobbler was an astrologer of no mean repute. He foretold events with much discretion. The ignorant bought his almanacs, and many believed in them as a Bible. In fact, astrology was enjoying a boom. Swift came to London and found that Partridge's predictions were the theme at the coffee houses. He saw men argue and wax wroth, grow red in the face as they talked loud and long about nothing, just nothing. The whole thing struck Swift as being very funny, and he wrote an announcement of his intention to publish a rival almanac. He explained that he, too, was an astrologer, but an honest one, while Partridge was an impostor and a cheat. In fact, Partridge foretold only things which everyone knew would come true. As for himself, he could discern the future with absolute certainty, and to prove to the world his power, he would now make a prophecy. In substance, it was as follows. My first prediction is but a trifle. It relates to Partridge, the almanac maker. I have consulted the star of his nativity and find that he will die on the 29th day of March next. This was signed Isaac Bickerstaff and duly issued in pamphlet form. It had such an air of sincerity that both the believers and the scoffers read it with interest. The 30th of March came, and another pamphlet from Isaac Bickerstaff appeared, announcing the fulfillment of the prophecy. It related how, toward the end of March, Partridge began to languish, how he grew ill and at last took to his bed, and his conscience then smiting him, he confessed to the world that he was a fraud and a rogue, that all his prophecies were impositions. He then passed away. Partridge was wild with rage and immediately replied in a manifesto declaring that he was alive and well, and moreover was alive on March 29th. To this Bickerstaff replied in a pamphlet more seriously humorous than ever, reaffirming that Partridge was dead, and closing with the statement that, if an uninformed carcass still walks about calling itself Partridge, I do not in any way consider myself responsible for that. The joke set all London on a grin. Wherever Partridge went, he was met with smiles and jeers, and astrology became only a jest to a vast number of people who had formerly believed in it seriously. When Benjamin Franklin started his Poor Richard's Almanac 25 years later, in the first issue he prophesied the death of one Dart who set the pace at that time as almanac maker in America. The man was to expire on the afternoon of October 17th, 1738, at 3:29 o'clock. Dart, being somewhat of a joker himself, came out with an announcement that he too had consulted the oracle and found he would live until October 26th and possibly longer. On October 18th, Franklin announced Dart's death and explained that it occurred promptly on time, all as prophesied. Yet Dart lived to publish many almanacs, but Poor Richard got his advertisement, and many staid, broad-brimmed Philadelphians smiled who had never smiled before, not only smiled but subscribed. Benjamin Franklin was a great and good man, as any man must be who fathers another's jokes, introducing these orphaned children to the world as his own. Perhaps no one who has written of Swift knew him so well as Delany, and this writer, who seems to have possessed a judicial quality far beyond most men, has told us that Swift was moral in conduct to the point of asceticism. His deportment was grave and dignified, and his duties as a priest were always performed with exemplary diligence. He visited the sick, regularly administered the sacraments, and was never known to absent himself from morning prayers. When Harley was Lord Treasurer, Swift seems to have been on the topmost crest of the wave of popularity. Invitations from nobility flowed in upon him. Beautiful women deigned to go in search of his society. Royalty recognized him. And yet all this time, he was only a country priest with a liking for literature. Collins tells us that the reason for his popularity is plain. Swift was one of the kings of the earth. Like Pope Innocent III, like Chatham, he was one to whom the world involuntarily pays tribute. His will was a will of adamant, his intellect so keen that it impressed everyone who approached him, his temper singularly stern, dauntless and haughty, but his wit was never filled with gaiety. He was never known to laugh. Amid the wildest uproar that his sallies caused, he would sit with face austere, unmoved. Personally, Swift was a gentleman. When he was scurrilous, abusive, ribald, malicious, it was anonymously. Is this to his credit? I should not say so, but if a man is indecent and he hides behind a nom de plume, it is at least presumptive proof that he is not dead to shame. Leslie Stephen tells us that Swift was a churchman to the backbone. No man who is a churchman to the backbone is ever very pious. The spirit maketh alive, but the letter killeth. One looks in vain for traces of spirituality in the dean. His sermons are models of churchly commonplace and full of the stock phrases of a formal religion. He never bursts into flame. Yet he most thoroughly and sincerely believed in religion. I believe in religion. It keeps the masses in check. And then I uphold Christianity because if it is abolished, the stability of the church might be endangered, he said. Philip asked the eunuch a needless question when he inquired, Understandest thou what thou readest? No one so poorly sexed as Swift can comprehend spiritual truth. Spirituality and sexuality are elements that are never separated. Swift was as incapable of spirituality as he was of the grand passion. The Dean had affection. He was a warm friend. He was capable even of a degree of love. But his sexual and spiritual nature was so cold and calculating that he did not hesitate to sacrifice love to churchly ambition. He argued that the celibacy of the Catholic clergy is a wise expediency. The bachelor physician and the unmarried priest have an influence among gentle womankind, young or old, married or single, that a Benedict can never hope for. Why this is so might be difficult to explain, but discerning men know the fact. In truth, when a priest marries, he should at once take a new charge. For if he remains with his old flock, a goodly number of his lady parishioners, in ages varying from 17 to 70, will with fierce indignation rend his reputation. Swift was as wise as a serpent, but not always as harmless as a dove. He was making every effort to secure his mitre and crozier. He had many women friends in London and elsewhere who had influence rather than run the risk of losing this influence. He never acknowledged Stella as his wife. Choosing fame rather than love, he withered at the heart, then died at the top. The life of every man is a seamless garment, its woof his thoughts, its warp his deeds. When for him the roaring loom of time stops and the thread is broken, foolish people sometimes point to certain spots in the robe and say, "Oh, why did he not leave that out?" Not knowing that every action of man is a sequence from off fate's spindle. Let us accept the work of genius as we find it, not bemoaning because it is not better, but giving thanks because it is so good. Well-fed, rollicking priest is Father O'Toole of Dublin, with a big round face, a double chin, and a brogue that you can cut with a knife. My letter of introduction from Monsignor Satolli caused him at once to bring in a large, suspicious black bottle and 2 glasses. Then we talked of Ireland's wrongs and woman's rights, and of all the Irishmen in America whom I was supposed to know. We spoke of the illustrious Irishmen who had passed on, and I mentioned a name that caused the Holy Father to spring from his chair in indignation. "Swift, is it? Swift? No, me lad, don't go near him. He was the divil's own, the very worst that ever followed the swish of a petticoat. No, no. If ye go to his grave, it'll bring ye bad luck for a year. It's Tom Moore you want. Tom was the bye. Arrah, now, and it's meself that'll go wid ye." And so the Reverend Father put on a long black coat and his St. Patrick's Day hat, and we started. We were met at the gate by a delegation of Spalpeens that had located me on the inside of the house and were lying in wait. All American travelers in Ireland are supposed to be millionaires, and this may possibly explain the lavish attention that is often tendered them. At any rate, various members of the delegation wished long life to the elegant American gentleman and hinted in terms unmistakable that pence would be acceptable. The Holy Father applied his cane vigorously to the ragged rears of the more presumptuous and bade them begone, but still they followed and pressed close about. "Here, I'll show you how to get rid of the dirty gang," said His Holiness. "Have ye a penny, I don't know?" I produced a handful of small change, which the Father immediately took and tossed into the street. Instantly there was a heterogeneous mass of young Hibernians piled up in the dirt in a grand struggle for spoils. It reminded me of football incidents I had seen at Fair Harvard. In the meantime, we escaped down a convenient alley and crossed the River Liffey to Old Dublin, inside the walls of the old city, through crooked lanes and winding streets that here and there showed signs of departed gentility, where now was only squalor, want, and vice, until we came to number 12 Angier Street, a quaint 3-story brick building now used as a public. In the wall above the door is a marble slab with this inscription: "Here was born Thomas Moore on the 28th day of May, 1778. Above this, in a niche, is a bust of the poet. Tom's father was a worthy greengrocer who, according to the author of Lalla Rookh, always gave good measure and full count. It was ever a cause of regret to the elder Moore that his son did not show sufficient capacity to be trusted safely with the business. The upper rooms of the house were shown to us by an obliging landlady. Father O'Toole had been here before and led the way to a snug little chamber and explained that in this room the future poet of Ireland was found under one of his father's cabbage leaves. We descended to the neat little bar-room with its sanded floor and polished glassware and shining brass. The Holy Father ordered "arf and arf" at my expense and recited one of Moore's ballads. The landlady then gave us Byron's "Here's a health to thee, Tom Moore." A neighbour came in. Then we had more ballads, more "arf and arf," a selection from Lalla Rookh, and various tales of the poet's early life, which possibly would be hard to verify. And as the tumult raged, the smoke of battle gave me opportunity to slip away. I crossed the street, turned down one block, and entered St. Patrick's Cathedral. Great, roomy, gloomy, solemn temple, where the rumble of city traffic is deadened to a faint hum. Without, the world's unceasing noises rise, turmoil, disquietude, and busy fears. Within, there are the sounds of other years, thoughts full of prayer and solemn harmonies, which imitate on earth the peaceful skies. Other worshippers were there. Standing beside a great stone pillar, I could make them out kneeling on the tiled floor. Gradually, my eyes became accustomed to the subdued light, and right at my feet I saw a large brass plate set in the floor, and on it only this: Swift died October 19th, 1745, aged 78. On the wall near is a bronze tablet, the inscription of which in Latin was dictated by Swift himself. "Here lies the body of Jonathan Swift, dean of this cathedral, where fierce indignation can no longer rend his heart. Go, wayfarer, and imitate, if thou canst, one who, as far as in him lay, was an earnest champion of liberty." Above this is a fine bust of the dean, and to the right is another tablet. Underneath lie interred the mortal remains of Mrs. Hester Johnson, better known to the world as Stella, under which she is celebrated in the writings of Dr. Jonathan Swift, dean of this cathedral. She was a person of extraordinary endowments and accomplishments in body, mind, and behavior, justly admired and respected by all who knew her, on account of her eminent virtues, as well as for her great natural and acquired perfections. These were suffering souls, and great. Would they have been so great had they not suffered? Who can tell? Were the waters troubled in order that they might heal the people? Did Swift misuse this excellent woman is a question that has been asked and answered again and again. A great author has written, "A woman, a tender, noble, excellent woman, has a dog's heart. She licks the hand that strikes her, and wrong nor cruelty nor injustice nor disloyalty can cause her to turn." Death in pity took Stella first, took her in the loyalty of love and the fullness of faith from a world which for love has little recompense, and for faith small fulfillment. Stella was buried by torchlight at midnight on the 30th day of January, 1728. Swift was sick at the time and wrote in his journal, "This is the night of her funeral, and I am removed to another apartment that I may not see the light in the church which is just over against my window." But in his imagination he saw the gleaming torches as their dull light shone through the coloured windows, and he said, "They will soon do as much for me." But 17 years came crawling by before the torches flared, smoked, and gleamed as the mourners chanted a requiem and the clods fell on the coffin, and their echoes intermingled with the solemn voice of the priest as he said, "Dust to dust, ashes to ashes." In 1835, the graves were opened and casts taken of the skulls. The top of Swift's skull had been sawed off at the autopsy, and a bottle in which was a parchment setting forth the facts was inserted in the head that had conceived Gulliver's Travels. I examined the casts. The woman's head is square and shapely. Swift's head is a refutation of phrenology, being small, sloping, and ordinary. The bones of Swift and Stella were placed in one coffin and now rest under 3 feet of concrete beneath the floor of St. Patrick's. So sleep the lovers joined in death. Walt Whitman. All seems beautiful to me. I can repeat over to men and women, "You have done such good to me. I would do the same to you. I will recruit for myself and you as I go. I will scatter myself among men and women as I go. I will toss a new gladness and roughness among them. Song of the Open Road, Walt Whitman. Max Nordau wrote a book. Wrote it with his tongue in his cheek, a dash of vitriol in the ink, and with a pen that scratched. And the first critic who seemed to place a just estimate on the work was Mr. Zangwill, he who has no Christian name. Mr. Zangwill made an attempt to swear out a writ de lunatico inquirendo against his Jewish brother, on the ground that the first symptom of insanity is often the delusion that others are insane. And this being so, Dr. Nordau was not a safe subject to be at large. But the assize of public opinion denied the petition, and the dear people bought the book at from $3 to $5 a copy. Printed in several languages, its sales have mounted to 100,000 volumes, and the author's net profit is full $40,000. No wonder is it that with pockets full to bursting, Dr. Nordau goes out behind the house and laughs uproariously whenever he thinks of how he has worked the world. If Dr. Talmage is the Barnum of theology, surely we may call Dr. Nordau the Barnum of science. His agility in manipulating facts is equal to Herman's Now You See It and Now You Don't, with pocket handkerchiefs. Yet Herman's exhibition is worth the admittance fee, and Nordau's book, seemingly written in collaboration with Jules Verne and Mark Twain, would be cheap for $1. But what I object to is Professor Herman's disciples posing as sure enough materializing mediums, and Professor Lombroso's followers calling themselves scientists, when each goes forth without scrip or purse with no other purpose than to supply themselves with both. Yet it was Barnum himself who said that the public delights in being humbugged, and strange it is that we will not allow ourselves to be thimble-rigged without paying for the privilege. Nordau's success hinged on his audacious assumption that the public knew nothing of the law of antithesis. Yet Plato explained that the opposites of things look alike, and sometimes are alike, and that was quite a while ago. The multitude answered, "Thou hast a devil." Many of them said, "He hath a devil and is mad." Festus said with a loud voice, "Paul, thou art beside thyself." And Nordau shouts in a voice more heady than that of Pilate, more throaty than that of Festus, "Mad, Whitman was, mad beyond the cavil of a doubt." In 1862, Lincoln, looking out of a window, before lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed, on one of the streets of Washington, saw a working man in shirt-sleeves go by. Turning to a friend, the president said, "There goes a man." The exclamation sounds singularly like that of Napoleon on meeting Goethe. But the Corsican's remark was intended for the poet's ear, while Lincoln did not know who his man was, although he came to know him afterward. Lincoln in his early days was a working man and an athlete, and he never quite got the idea out of his head, and I am glad, that he was still a hewer of wood. He once told George William Curtis that he more than half expected yet to go back to the farm and earn his daily bread by the work that his hands found to do. He dreamed of it nights, and whenever he saw a splendid toiler, he felt like hailing the man as brother and striking hands with him. When Lincoln saw Whitman strolling majestically past, he took him for a stevedore, or possibly the foreman of a construction gang. Whitman was 51 years old then. His long, flowing beard was snow-white, and the shock that covered his Jove-like head was iron-grey. His form was that of an Apollo who had arrived at years of discretion. He weighed an even 200 pounds and was just 6 feet high. His plain, check cotton shirt was open at the throat to the breast, and he had an independence, a self-sufficiency, and withal a cleanliness, a sweetness, and a gentleness that told that although he had a giant's strength, he did not use it like a giant. Whitman used no tobacco. Neither did he apply hot and rebellious liquors to his blood, and with unblushing forehead woo the means of debility and disease. Up to his 53rd year, he had never known a sick day, although at 30 his hair had begun to whiten. He had the look of age in his youth, and the look of youth in his age that often marks the exceptional man. But at 53, his splendid health was crowded to the breaking strain. How? Through caring for wounded, sick, and dying men, hour after hour, day after day, through the long, silent watches of the night. From 1864 to the day of his death in 1892, he was, physically, a man in ruins, but he did not wither at the top. Through it all, he held the healthy optimism of boyhood, carrying with him the perfume of the morning and the lavish heart of youth. Dr. Buck, who was superintendent of a hospital for the insane for 15 years and the intimate friend of Whitman all the time, has said, "His build, his stature, his exceptional health of mind and body, the size and form of his features, his cleanliness of mind and body, the grace of his movements and gestures, the grandeur, and especially the magnetism of his presence, the charm of his voice, his genial, kindly humor, the simplicity of his habits and tastes, his freedom from convention, the largeness and the beauty of his manner, his calmness and majesty, his charity and forbearance, his entire unresentfulness under whatever provocation, his liberality, his universal sympathy with humanity in all ages and lands, his broad tolerance, his Catholic friendliness, and his unexampled faculty of attracting affection all prove his perfectly proportioned manliness." But Whitman differed from the disciple of Lombroso in two notable particulars. He had no quarrel with the world, and he did not wax rich. "One thing thou lackest, O Walt Whitman," we might have said to the poet, "you are not a financier." He died poor, but this is no proof of degeneracy, save on change. When the children of Count Tolstoy endeavored to have him adjudged insane, the court denied the application and voiced the wisest decision that ever came out of Russia. A man who gives away his money is not necessarily more foolish than he who saves it. And with Horace L. Traubel, I assert that Whitman was the sanest man I ever saw. Some men make themselves homes, and others there be who rent rooms. Walt Whitman was essentially a citizen of the world. The world was his home, and mankind were his friends. There was a quality in the man peculiarly universal, a strong, virile poise that asked for nothing but took what it needed. He loved men as brothers, yet his brothers after the flesh understood him not. He loved children. They turned to him instinctively, but he had no children of his own. He loved women, and yet this strongly sexed and manly man never loved a woman. And I might here say, as Philip Gilbert Hamerton said of Turner, he was lamentably unfortunate in this. Throughout his whole life, he never came under the ennobling and refining influence of a good woman. It requires two to make a home. The first home was made when a woman, cradling in her loving arms a baby, crooned a lullaby. All the tender sentimentality we throw around a place is the result of the sacred thought that we live there with someone else. It is our home. The home is a tryst, the place where we retire and shut the world out. Lovers make a home, just as birds make a nest, and unless a man knows the spell of the divine passion, I hardly see how he can have a home at all. He only rents a room. Camden is separated from the city of Philadelphia by the Delaware River. Camden lies low and flat, a great, sandy, monotonous waste of straggling buildings. Here and there are straight rows of cheap houses, evidently erected by staid, broad-brimmed speculators from across the river, with eyes on the main chance, but they reckoned ill, for the town did not boom. Some of these houses have marble steps and white, barn-like shutters that might withstand a siege when a funeral takes place in one of these houses. The shutters are tied with strips of mournful black alpaca for a year and a day. Engineers, dockmen, express drivers, and mechanics largely make up the citizens of Camden. Of course, Camden has its smug corner where prosperous merchants most do congregate, where they play croquet in the front yards and have window boxes and a piano and veranda chairs and terracotta statuary, but for the most part the houses of Camden are rented and rented cheap. Many of the domiciles are frame and have the happy tumble-down look of the back streets in Charleston or Richmond, those streets where the white trash merges off into prosperous colored aristocracy. Old hats do duty in keeping out the fresh air where Providence has interfered and broken out a pane. Blinds hang by a single hinge. Bricks on the chimney tops threaten the passers-by. Stringers and posts mark the place where proud picket fences once stood, the pickets having gone for kindling long ago. In the warm summer evenings, men in shirt-sleeves sit on the front steps and stolidly smoke, while children pile up sand in the streets and play in the gutters. Parallel with Mickle Street, a block away, are railway tracks. Their noisy switch engines that never keep Sabbath puff back and forth day and night, sending showers of soot and smoke when the wind is right, and it usually is, straight over number 328, where, according to John Addington Symonds and William Michael Rossetti, lived the mightiest seer of the century, the man whom they rank with Socrates, Epictetus, St. Paul, Michelangelo, and Dante. It was in August of 1883 that I first walked up that little street, a hot, sultry summer evening. There had been a shower that turned the dust of the unpaved roadway to mud. The air was close and muggy. The houses, built right up to the sidewalks, over which in little gutters the steaming sewage ran, seemed to have discharged their occupants into the street to enjoy the cool of the day. Barefooted children by the score paddled in the mud. All the steps were filled with loungers. Some of the men had discarded not only coats but shirts as well, and now sat in flaming red underwear, holding babies. They say that woman's work is never done, but to the women of Mickle Street this does not apply. But stay, perhaps their work is never done. Anyway, I remember that women sat on the curbs in calico dresses or leaned out of the windows, and all seemed supremely free from care. "Can you tell me where Mr. Whitman lives?" I asked a portly dame who was resting her elbows on a window-sill. "Who? Mr. Whitman? You mean Walt Whitman?" "Yes. Show the gentleman Molly. He'll give you a nickel, I'm sure." I had not seen Molly. She stood behind me, but as her mother spoke, she seized tight hold of one of my fingers, claiming me as her lawful prey. And all the other children looked on with envious eyes as little Molly threw at them glances of scorn and marched me off. Molly was 5 going on 6, she told me. She had bright red hair, a grimy face, and little chapped feet that made not a sound as we walked. She got her nickel and carried it in her mouth, and this made conversation difficult. After going 1 block, she suddenly stopped, squared me around and pointing said, "Them is he," and disappeared. In a wheeled rattan chair in the hallway, a little back from the door of a plain, weather-beaten house, sat the coatless philosopher, his face and head wreathed in a tumult of snow-white hair. I had a little speech, all prepared weeks before and committed to memory, that I intended to repeat, telling him how I had read his poems and admired them. And further, I had stored away in my mind a few blades from Leaves of Grass that I purposed to bring out at the right time as a sort of certificate of character. But when that little girl jerked me right about face and heartlessly deserted me, I stared dumbly at the man whom I had come 100 miles to see. I began angling for my little speech, but could not fetch it. "Hello!" called the philosopher out of the white aureole. "Hello! Come here, boy!" He held out his hand, and as I took it, there was a grasp with meaning in it. "Don't go yet, Joe," he said to a man seated on the steps smoking a cob pipe. "The old woman's calling me," said the swarthy Joe. Joe evidently held truth lightly. "So long, Walt." "Goodbye, Joe. Sit down, lad, sit down." I sat in the doorway at his feet. "Now, isn't it queer? That fellow is a regular philosopher and works out some great problems, but he's ashamed to express 'em. He could no more give you his best than he could fly ashamed, I suppose, ashamed of the best that is in him. We are all a little that way, all but me. I try to write my best, regardless of whether the thing sounds ridiculous or not. Regardless of what others think or say or have said, ashamed of our holiest, truest, and best. Is it not too bad? You are 25 now? Well, boy, you may grow until you are 30, and then you will be as wise as you ever will be. Haven't you noticed that men of 60 have no clearer vision than men of 40? One reason is that we have been taught that we know all about life and death and the mysteries of the grave. But the main reason is that we are ashamed to shove out and be ourselves. Jesus expressed his own individuality, perhaps more than any other man we know of, and so he wields a wider influence than any other. And this though we only have a record of just 27 days of his life. Now that fellow that just left is an engineer, and he dreams some beautiful dreams, but he never expresses them to anyone, only hints them to me. And this only at twilight. He is like a weasel or a mink or a whippoorwill. He comes out only at night. If the weather was like this all the time, people would never learn to read and write, said Joe to me just as you arrived. And isn't that so? Here we can count 100 people up and down this street, and not one is reading, not one, but that is just lolling about, except the children, and they are happy only when playing in the dirt. Why, if this tropical weather should continue, we would all slip back into South Sea Islanders. You can raise good men only in a little strip around the North Temperate Zone. When you get out of the track of a glacier, a tender-hearted, sympathetic man of brains is an accident. Then the old man suddenly ceased, and I imagined that he was following the thought out in his own mind. We sat silent for a space. The twilight fell, and a lamplighter lit the street lamp on the corner. He stopped an instant to salute the poet cheerily as he passed. The man sitting on the doorstep across the street, smoking, knocked the ashes out of his pipe on his boot heel and went indoors. Women called their children, who did not respond, but still played on. Then the creepers were carried in to be fed their bread and milk and put to bed, and shortly shrill feminine voices ordered the other children indoors, and some obeyed. The night crept slowly on. I heard old Walt chuckle behind me, talking incoherently to himself, and then he said, "You are wondering why I live in such a place as this?" "Yes, that is exactly what I was thinking of. You think I belong in the country, in some quiet, shady place, but all I have to do is to shut my eyes and go there. No man loves the woods more than I. I was born within sound of the sea, down on Long Island, and I know all the songs that the seashell sings. But this babble and babel of voices pleases me better, especially since my legs went on a strike, for although I can't walk, you see, I can still mix with the throng, so I suffer no loss. In the woods, a man must be all hands and feet. I like the folks, the plain, ignorant, unpretentious folks, and the youngsters that come and slide on my cellar door do not disturb me a bit. I'm different from Carlyle. You know he had a noise-proof room where he locked himself in. Now when a huckster goes by, crying his wares, I open the blinds and often wrangle with the fellow over the price of things. But the rogues have got into a way lately of leaving truck for me and refusing pay. Today, an Irishman passed in 3 quarts of berries and walked off pretending to be mad because I offered to pay. When he was gone, I beckoned to the babies over the way. They came over and we had a feast. Yes, I like the folks around here. I like the women, and I like the men, and I like the babies. And I like the youngsters that play in the alley and make mud pies on my steps. I expect to stay here until I die. You speak of death as a matter of course. You are not afraid to die? Oh, no, my boy, death is as natural as life, and a deal kinder. But it is all good. I accept it all and give thanks. You have not forgotten my chant to death? Not I. I repeated a few lines from drum taps. He followed me, rapping gently with his cane on the floor, and with little interjectory remarks of, "That's so. Very true. Good, good." And when I faltered and lost the lines, he picked them up where the voice of my spirit tallied the song of the bird. In a strong, clear voice, but a voice full of sublime feeling, he repeated those immortal lines beginning, "Come, lovely and soothing death. Come, lovely and soothing death, undulate round the world, serenely arriving, in the day, in the night, to all, to each, sooner or later, delicate death. Praise be the fathomless universe for life and joy, and for objects and knowledge curious, and for love, sweet love. But praise, praise, praise for the sure enwinding arms of cool, enfolding death. Dark mother always gliding near with soft feet. Have none chanted for thee a chant of fullest welcome? Then I chant for thee, I glorify thee above all, I bring thee a song that when thou must indeed come, come unfalteringly. Approach, strong deliveress. When it is so, when thou hast taken them, I joyously sing the death, lost in the loving, floating ocean of thee, laved in the flood of thy bliss, O death. From me to thee, glad serenades, dances for thee I propose, saluting thee, adornments and feastings for thee, and the sights of the open landscape and the high-spread sky are fitting, and life and the fields, and the huge and thoughtful night. The night in silence under many a star, the ocean shore and the husky, whispering wave whose voice I know, and the soul turning to thee, O vast and well-veiled death, and the body gratefully nestling close to thee. Over the treetops I float thee a song, over the rising and sinking waves, over the myriad fields and the prairies wide, over the dense-packed cities all, and the teeming wharves and ways, I float this carol with joy to thee, O death. The last playing youngster had silently disappeared from the streets. The doorsteps were deserted, save where across the way a young man and maiden sat in the gloaming, conversing in low monotone. The clouds had drifted away. A great yellow star shone out above the chimney tops in the east. I arose to go. "I wish you'd come oftener. I see you so seldom, lad," said the old man, half plaintively. I did not explain that we had never met before, that I had come from New York purposely to see him. He thought he knew me, and so he did. As much as I could impart, the rest was irrelevant. As to my occupation or name, what booted it? He had no curiosity concerning me. I grasped his outstretched hand in both of my own. He said not a word, neither did I. I turned and made my way to the ferry, past the whispering lovers on the doorsteps and over the railway tracks where the noisy engines puffed. As I walked on board the boat, the wind blew up cool and fresh from the west. The star in the east grew brighter, and other stars came out, reflecting themselves like gems in the dark blue of the Delaware. There was a soft sublimity in the sound of the bells that came echoing over the waters. My heart was very full, for I had felt the thrill of being in the presence of a great and loving soul. It was the first time and the last that I ever saw Walt Whitman. A good many writers bear no message. They carry no torch. Sometimes they excite wonder, or they amuse and divert us from our work. To be diverted to a certain degree may be well, but there is a point where earth ends and cloudland begins, and even great poets occasionally befog the things they would reveal. Homer was seemingly blind to much simple truth. Virgil carries you away from earth. Horace was undone without his Maecenas. Dante makes you an exile. Shakespeare was singularly silent concerning the doubts, difficulties, and common lives of common people. Byron's Corsair life does not help you in your toil. And in his fight with English bards and Scotch reviewers, we crave neutrality. To be caught in the meshes of Pope's Dunciad is not pleasant, and Lowell's Fable for Critics is only another Dunciad. But above all other poets who have ever lived, the author of Leaves of Grass was the poet of humanity. Milton knew all about heaven, and Dante conducts us through hell, but it was left for Whitman to show us earth. His voice never goes so high that it breaks into an impotent falsetto, neither does it growl and snarl at things it does not understand, and not understanding does not like. He was so great that he had no envy, and his insight was so sure that he had no prejudice. He never boasted that he was higher, nor claimed to be less than any of the other sons of men. He met all on terms of absolute equality, mixing with the poor, the lowly, the fallen, the oppressed, the cultured, the rich, simply as brother with brother. And when he said to an outcast, "Not till the sun excludes you will I exclude you," he voiced a sentiment worthy of a god. He was brother to the elements, the mountains, the seas, the clouds, the sky. He loved them all, and partook of them all in his large, free, unselfish, untrammeled nature. His heart knew no limits, and feeling his feet mortised in granite and his footsteps tin-oned in infinity, he knew the amplitude of time. Only the great are generous, only the strong are forgiving. Like Lot's wife, most poets look back over their shoulders, and those who are not looking backward insist that we shall look into the future, and the vast majority of the whole scribbling rabble accept the precept, "Man never is, but always to be blessed." We grieve for childhood's happy days, and long for sweet rest in heaven, and sigh for mansions in the skies. And the people about us seem so indifferent, and our friends so lukewarm, and really no one understands us, and our environment queers our budding spirituality, and the frost of jealousy nips our aspirations. Oh paradise, the world is growing old, who would not be at rest and free where love is never cold? So sing the fearsome dyspeptics of the stylus oanemic. He, you bloodless she, nipping at crackers, sipping at tea, why not consider that? Although evolutionists tell us where we came from, and theologians inform us where we are going to, yet the only thing we are really sure of is that we are here. The present is the perpetually moving spot where history ends and prophecy begins. It is our only possession. The past we reach through lapsing memory, halting recollection, hearsay, and belief. We pierce the future by wistful faith or anxious hope, but the present is beneath our feet. Whitman sings the beauty and the glory of the present. He rebukes our groans and sighs, bids us look about on every side at the wonders of creation, and at the miracles within our grasp. He lifts us up, restores us to our own, introduces us to man and to nature, and thus infuses into us courage, manly pride, self-reliance, and the strong faith that comes when we feel our kinship with God. He was so mixed with the universe that his voice took on the sway of elemental integrity and candor. Absolutely honest, this man was unafraid and unashamed, for nature has neither apprehension, shame, nor vainglory in leaves of grass. Whitman speaks as all men have ever spoken who believe in God and in themselves, oracular, without apology or abasement. Fearlessly he tells of the powers and mysteries that pervade and guide all life, all death, all purpose. His work is masculine as the sun is masculine, for the prophetic voice is as surely masculine as the lullaby and lyric cry are feminine. Whitman brings the warmth of the sun to the buds of the heart, so that they open and bring forth form, color, perfume. He becomes for them aliment and dew, so these buds become blossoms, fruits, tall branches, and stately trees that cast refreshing shadows. There are men who are to other men as the shadow of a mighty rock in a weary land. Such is Walt Whitman. Victor Hugo. Man is neither master of his life nor of his fate. He can but offer to his fellow men his efforts to diminish human suffering. He can but offer to God his indomitable faith in the growth of liberty. Victor Hugo. Victor Hugo. The father of Victor Hugo was a general in the army of Napoleon, his mother a woman of rare grace and brave good sense. Victor was the third of three sons, 6 weeks before the birth of her youngest boy. The mother wrote to a very dear friend of her husband this letter. To General Victor Lahore, Citizen General, soon to become the mother of a third child, it would be very agreeable to me if you would act as its godfather. Its name shall be yours, one which you have not belied, and one which you have so well honored, Victor or Victorine. Your consent will be a testimonial of your friendship for us. Please accept, Citizen General, the assurance of our sincere attachment. Femme Hugo. Victorine was expected. Victor came. General Lahore acted as sponsor for the infant. A soldier's family lives here or there, everywhere or anywhere. In 1808, General Hugo was with Joseph Bonaparte in Spain. Victor was then 6 years old. His mother had taken as a residence a quaint house in the impasse of the Philantines, Paris. It was one of those peculiar old places occasionally seen in France. The environs of London have a few, America none of which I know. This house, roomy, comfortable and antiquated, was surrounded with trees and a tangle of shrubbery, vines and flowers. Above it all was a high stone wall, and in front a picket iron gate. It was a mosaic, a sample of the 16th century inlaid in this, solitary as the woods, quiet as a convent, sacred as a forest, a place for dreams and reverie and rest. At the back of the house was a dilapidated little chapel. Here an aged priest counted his beads, said daily mass, and endeavored to keep moth, rust, and ruin from the house of prayer. This priest was a scholar, a man of learning. He taught the children of Madame Hugo. Another man lived in this chapel. He never went outside the gate and used to take exercise at night. He had a cot bed in the shelter of the altar. Beneath his pillow were a pair of pistols and a copy of Tacitus. This man lived there summer and winter, although there was no warmth save the scanty sunshine that stole in through the shattered windows. He too taught the children and gave them little lectures on history. He loved the youngest boy and would carry him on his shoulder and tell him stories of deeds of valor. One day, a file of soldiers came. They took this man and manacled him. The mother sought to keep her children inside the house so that they should not witness the scene, but she did not succeed. The boys fought their mother and the servants in a mad frenzy, trying to rescue the old man. The soldiers formed in columns of 4 and marched their prisoner away. Not long after, Madame Hugo was passing the church of Saint-Jacques-du-Haut-Pas. Her youngest boy's hand was in hers. She saw a large placard posted in front of the church. She paused and, pointing to it, said, "Victor, read that." The boy read. It was a notice that General Lahore had been shot that day on the plains of Grenville by order of a court-martial. General Lahore was a gentleman of Brittany. He was a Republican, and 5 years before had grievously offended the emperor. A charge of conspiracy being proved against him, a price was placed upon his head, and he found a temporary refuge with the mother of his godson. That tragic incident of the arrest and the placard announcing General Lahore's death burned deep into the soul of the manling, and who shall say to what extent it colored his future life? When Napoleon met his downfall, it was also a Waterloo for General Hugo. His property was confiscated, and penury took the place of plenty. When Victor was 19, his mother having died, the family life was broken up. In Les Miserables, the early struggles of Marius are described, and this, the author has told us, may be considered autobiography. He has related how the young man lived in a garret, how he would sweep this barren room, how he would buy a pennyworth of cheese, waiting until dusk to get a loaf of bread, and slink home as furtively as if he had stolen it. How, carrying his book under his arm, he would enter the butcher's shop, and after being elbowed by jeering servants till he felt the cold sweat standing out on his forehead, he would take off his hat to the astonished butcher and ask for a single mutton chop. This he would carry to his garret, and cooking it himself, it would be made to last for 3 days. In this way, he managed to live on less than $200 a year, derived from the proceeds of poems, pamphlets, and essays. At this time, he was already an Academy laureate, having received honorable mention for a poem submitted in a competition. In his 20th year, fortune came to him in triple form. He brought out a book of poems that netted him 700 francs. Soon after the publication of this book, Louis XVIII, who knew the value of having friends who were ready writers, bestowed on him a pension of 1,000 francs a year. Then these 2 pieces of good fortune made possible a third, his marriage. Early marriages are like late ones. They may be wise, and they may not. Victor Hugo's marriage with Adèle Faucher was a most happy event. A man with a mind as independent as Victor Hugo's is sure to make enemies. The classics were positive that he was defiling the well of classic French, and they sought to write him down. But by writing a man up, you cannot write him down. The only thing that can smother a literary aspirant is silence. Victor Hugo coined the word when he could not find it, transposed phrases, inverted sentences, and never called a spade an agricultural implement. Not content with this, he put the spade on exhibition, and this often at unnecessary times, and occasionally prefaced the word with an adjective. Had he been let alone, he would not have done this. The censors told him he must not use the name of deity, nor should he refer so often to kings. At once, he doubled his topsies and put on his stage 3 Uncle Toms when one might have answered like Shakespeare. He used idioms and slang with profusion, anything to express the idea. Will this convey the thought? If so, it was written down, and once written, Beelzebub and all his hosts could not make him change it. But in the interest of truth, let me note one exception. "I do not like that word," said Mademoiselle Mars to Victor Hugo at a rehearsal of Hernani. "Can I not change it?" "I wrote it so, and it must stand," was the answer. Mademoiselle Mars used another expression instead of the author's, and he promptly asked her to resign her part. She wept, and upon agreeing to adhere to the text was reinstated in favor. Rehearsal after rehearsal occurred, and the words were repeated as written. The night of the performance came. Superb was the stage setting, splendid the audience. The play went forward amid loud applause. The scene was reached where came the objectionable word. Did Mademoiselle Mars use it? Of course not. She used the word she chose. She was a woman 53 times she played the part, and not once did she use the author's pet phrase. And he was wise enough not to note the fact. The moral of this is that not even a strong man can cope with a small woman who weeps at the right time. The censorship forbade the placing of Marion Delorme on the stage until a certain historical episode in it had been changed. Would the author be so kind as to change it? Not he. Then it shall not be played, said Monsieur de Martignac. The author hastened to interview the minister in person. He got a North Pole reception. In fact, Monsieur de Martignac said that it was his busy day, and that playwriting was foolish business anyway. But if a man were bound to write, he should write to amuse, not to instruct. And young Hugo was bowed out. When he found himself well outside the door, he was furious. He would see the king himself, and he did see the king. His Majesty was gracious and very patient. He listened to the young author's plea, talked book lore, recited poetry, showed that he knew Hugo's verses, asked after the author's wife, then the baby, and said that the play could not go on. Hugo turned to go. Charles X called him back and said that he was glad the author had called. In fact, he was about to send for him. His pension thereafter should be 6,000 francs a year. Victor Hugo declined to receive it. Of course, the papers were full of the subject. All cafedom took sides. Paris had a topic for gesticulation, and Paris improved the opportunity. Conservatism having stopped this play, there was only one thing to do: write another. For a play of Victor Hugo's must be put upon the stage. All his friends said so. His honor was at stake. In 3 weeks, another play was ready. The censors read it and gave their report. They said that Hernani was whimsical in conception, defective in execution, a tissue of extravagances, generally trivial and often coarse, but they advised that it be put upon the stage, just to show the public to what extent of folly an author could go. In order to preserve the dignity of their office, they drew up a list of 6 places where the text should be changed. Both sides were afraid, so each was willing to give in a point. The text was changed, and the important day for the presentation was drawing nigh. The Romanticists were, of course, anxious that the play should be a great success. The classics were quite willing that it should be otherwise. In fact, they had bought up the claque and were making arrangements to hiss it down. But the author's friends were numerous. They were young and lusty. They held meetings behind locked doors and swore terrible oaths that the play should go. On the day of the initial performance, 5 hours before the curtain rose, they were on hand, having taken the best seats in the house. They also took the worst, wherever a hisser might hide. These advocates of liberal art wore coats of green or red or blue, costumes like bullfighters, trousers and hats to match or not to match, anything to defy tradition. All during the performance there was an uproar. Théophile Gautier has described the event in most entertaining style, and in L'Historie de Romanticisme the record of it is found in detail. Several American writers have touched upon this particular theme, and all who have seen fit to write of it seem to have stood under umbrellas when God rained humor. One writer calls it the outburst of a tremendous revolution in literature. He speaks of smoldering flames, the hordes that furiously fought entrenched behind prestige, age, caste, wealth and tradition, suppression and extermination of heresy, those who sought to stop the onward march of civilization, etc. Let us be sensible. A cane rush is not a revolution, and Bloody Monday at Harvard is not a decisive battle in the onward and upward march. If Hernani had been hissed down, Victor Hugo would have lived just as long and might have written better. Civilization is not held in place by noisy youths in flaming waistcoats, and even if every cabbage had hit its mark and every egg bespattered its target, the morning stars would still sing together. The Hunchback of Notre Dame was next turned out, written in 5 months, and was a great success. Publishers besieged the author for another story, but he preferred poetry. It was 30 years before his next novel, Les Misérables, appeared. But all the time he wrote plays, verses, essays, pamphlets. Everything that he penned was widely read amid storms of opposition and cries of bravo. Continually making friends, he moved steadily forward. Men like Victor Hugo can be killed or they may be banished, but they cannot be bought. Neither can they be intimidated into silence. He resigned his pension and boldly expressed himself in his own way. He knew history by heart and toyed with it. Politics was his delight, but it is a mistake to call him a statesman. He was bold to rashness, impulsive, impatient, and vehement. Because a man is great is no reason why he should be proclaimed perfect. Such men as Victor Hugo need no veneer. The truth will answer. He would explode a keg of powder to kill a fly. He was an agitator. But these zealous souls are needed, not to govern or to be blindly followed, but rather to make other men think for themselves. Yet to do this in a monarchy is not safe. The years passed, and the time came for either Hugo or royalty to go. France was not large enough for both. It proved to be Hugo. A bounty of 25,000 francs was offered for his body, dead or alive. Through a woman's devotion, he escaped to Brussels. He was driven from there to Jersey, then to Guernsey. It was 19 years before he returned to Paris, years of banishment, but years of glory, exiled by fate that he might do his work. Each day a steamer starts from Southampton for Guernsey, Alderney, and Jersey. These are names known to countless farmers' boys the wide world over. You cannot mistake the Channel Island boats. They smell like a county fair. And though you be blind and deaf, it is impossible to board the wrong craft. Every time one of these staunch little steamers lands in England, crates containing mild-eyed, lusty calves are slid down the gangplank, marked for Maine, Iowa, California, or some uttermost part of the earth. There his veal ship, worth his weight in gold, is going to found a kingdom. I stood on the dock watching the bovine passengers disembark, and furtively listened the while to an animated argument between two rather rough-looking, red-faced men clothed in corduroys and carrying long, stout staffs. Mixed up in their conversation, I caught the names of royalty, then of celebrities great and artists famous, warriors, orators, philanthropists, and musicians. Could it be possible that these rustics were poets? It must be so. And there came to me thoughts of Thoreau, Walt Whitman, Joaquin Miller, and all that sublime company of singers in shirt-sleeves. Suddenly the wind veered and the veil fell. All the sacred names so freely bandied about were those of families with mighty milk records. When we went on board and the good ship was slipping down the Solent, I made the acquaintance of these men and was regaled with more cow talk than I had heard since I left Texas. We saw the island of Portsea, where Dickens was born, and got a glimpse of the spires of Portsmouth as we passed. Then came the Isle of Wight and the quaint town of Cowes. I made a bright joke on the latter place, as it was pointed out to me by my Jersey friend, but it went for naught. A pleasant sail of 8 hours and the towering cliffs of Guernsey came in sight. Foam-dashed and spray-covered, they rise right out of the sea at the south, to the height of 270 feet. About them great flocks of seafowl hover, swirl, and soar. Wild, rugged, and romantic is the scene. The Isle of Guernsey is 9 miles long and 6 wide. Its principal town is St. Peter Port, a place of about 16,000 inhabitants, where a full dozen hotel porters meet the incoming steamer and struggle for your baggage. Hotels and boarding houses here are numerous and good. Guernsey is a favorite resort for invalids and those who desire to flee the busy world for a space. In fact, the author of Les Miserables has made exile popular. Emerging from my hotel at St. Peter Port, I was accosted by a small edition of Gavroche, all in tatters, who proposed showing me the way to Hauteville House. For a penny I already knew the route, but accepted the offer on Gavroche's promise to reveal to me a secret about the place. The secret is this. The house is haunted, and when the wind is east, and the setting moon shows only a narrow rim above the rocks, ghosts come and dance a solemn minuet on the glass roof above the study. Had Gavroche ever seen them? No, but he knew a boy who had. Years and years, ever so many years ago, long before there were any steamboats, And when only a schooner came to Guernsey once a week, a woman was murdered in Hauteville House. Her ghost came back with other ghosts and drove the folks away. So the big house remained vacant, save for the spooks, who paid no rent. Then, after a great long time, Victor Hugo came and lived in the house. The ghosts did not bother him. Faith, they had been keeping the place just a purpose for him. He rented the house first and liked it so well that he bought it, got it at half price on account of the ghosts. Here, every Christmas, Victor Hugo gave a big dinner in the great oak hall to all the children in Guernsey, hundreds of them, all the way from babies that could barely creep to boys with whiskers. They were all fed on turkey, tarts, apples, oranges, and figs, and when they went away, each was given a bag of candy to take home. Climbing a narrow, crooked street, we came to the great, dark, gloomy edifice situated at the top of a cliff. The house was painted black by some strange whim of a former occupant. "We will leave it so," said Victor Hugo. "Liberty is dead, and we are in mourning for her." But the gloom of Hauteville House is only on the outside. Within, all is warm and homelike. The furnishings are almost as the poet left them, and the marks of his individuality are on every side. In the outer hall stands an elegant column of carved oak, its panels showing scenes from The Hunchback. In the dining room there is fantastic wainscoting with plaques and porcelain tiles inlaid here and there. Many of these ornaments were presents, sent by unknown admirers in all parts of the world. In Les Miserables, there is a chance line revealing the author's love for the beautiful as shown in the grain of woods. The result was an influx of polished panels, slabs, chips, hewings, carvings, and in one instance a log sent collect. Samples of redwood, ebony, calamander, hammermellies, suradani, tamarind, satinwood, mahogany, walnut, maples of many kinds, and oaks without limit. All are there. A mammoth axe helve I noticed on the wall was labeled shagbark hickory from Missouri. These specimens of wood were sometimes made up into haytracks, chairs, canes, or panels for doors, and are seen in odd corners of these rambling rooms. Charles Hugo once facetiously wrote to a friend, "We have bought no kindling for 3 years." At another time he writes, "Father still is sure he can sketch and positive he can carve. He has several jackknives and whittles names, dates and emblems on sticks and furniture. We tremble for the piano." In the dining room I noticed a huge oaken chair fastened to the wall with a chain. On the mantel was a statuette of the Virgin. On the pedestal, Victor Hugo had engraved lines speaking of her as freedom's goddess. This dining room affords a sunny view out into the garden. On this floor are also a reception room, library, and a smoking room. On the next floor are various sleeping apartments and 2 cozy parlours, known respectively as the Red Room and the Blue. Both are rich in curious draperies, a little more pronounced in colour than some folks admire. The next floor contains the Oak Gallery, a ballroom we should call it. 5 large windows furnish a flood of light. In the centre of this fine room is an enormous candelabrum with many branches. At the top, a statue of wood, the whole carved by Victor Hugo's own hands. The Oak Gallery is a regular museum of curiosities of every sort. Books, paintings, carvings, busts, firearms, musical instruments. A long glass case contains a large number of autograph letters from the world's celebrities written to Hugo in exile. At the top of the house and built on its flat roof is the most interesting apartment of Hauteville House. The study and workroom of Victor Hugo, 3 of its sides, and the roof are of glass. The floor, too, is one immense slab of sea-green glass. Sliding curtains worked by pulleys cut off the light as desired. More light, said the great man again and again. He gloried and revelled in the sunshine. Here, in the winter, with no warmth but the sun's rays, his eyes shaded by his felt hat, he wrote, always standing at a shelf fixed in the wall. On this shelf were written all the toilers, The Man Who Laughs, Shakespeare, and much of Les Miserables. The leaves of manuscript were numbered and fell on the floor to remain perhaps for days before being gathered up. When Victor Hugo went to Guernsey, he went to liberty, not to banishment. He arrived at Hauteville House poor in purse and broken in health. Here the fire of his youth came back, and his pen retrieved the fortune that royalty had confiscated. The forenoons were given to earnest work, the daughter composed music, the sons translated Shakespeare and acted as their father's faithful helpers. Madame Hugo collected the notes of her husband's life and cheerfully looked after her household affairs. Several hours of each afternoon were given to romp and play. The evenings were sacred to music, reading, and conversation. Horace Greeley was once a prisoner in Paris. From his cell he wrote, "The St. Peter who holds the keys of this place has kindly locked the world out, and for once, thank heaven, I am free from intrusion. Lovers of truth must thank exile for some of our richest and ripest literature." Exile is not all exile. Imagination cannot be imprisoned amid the winding bastions of the brain. Thought roams free and untrammeled. Liberty is only a comparative term, and Victor Hugo at Guernsey enjoyed 1,000 times more freedom than ever ruling monarch knew. Standing at the shelf desk where this gentleman of France stood for so many happy hours, I inscribed my name in the visitor's book. I thanked the good woman who had shown me the place, and told me so much of interest, thanked her in words that seemed but a feeble echo of all that my heart would say. I went down the stairs, out at the great carved doorway, and descended the well-worn steps. Perched on a crag waiting for me was little Gavroche, his rags fluttering in the breeze. He offered to show me the great stone chair where Gilliatt sat when the tide came up and carried him away. And did I want to buy a bull calf? Gavroche knew where there was a fine one that could be bought cheap. Gavroche would show me both the calf and the stone chair for 3d. I accepted the offer, and we went down the stony street toward the sea, hand in hand. On the 28th day of June, 1894, I took my place in the long line and passed slowly through the Pantheon at Paris and viewed the body of President Carnot. The same look of proud dignity that I had seen in life was there, calm, composed, serene. The inanimate clay was clothed in the simple black of a citizen of the Republic, the only mark of office being the red silken sash that covered the spot in the breast where the stiletto stroke of hate had gone home. Amid bursts of applause, surrounded by loving friends and loyal adherents, he was stricken down and passed out into the unknown. Happy fate, to die before the fickle populace had taken up a new idol, to step in an instant beyond the reach of malice, to leave behind the self-seekers that pursue, the hungry horde that follows, the zealots who defame, to escape the dagger thrust of calumny and receive only the glittering steel that at the same time wrote his name indelibly on the roll of honor. Carnot, thrice happy thou! Thy name is secure on history's page, and thy dust, now resting beneath the dome of the Pantheon, is bedewed with the tears of thy countrymen. Saint Genevieve, the patron saint of Paris, died in 512. She was buried on a hilltop, the highest point in Paris, on the left bank of the Seine. Over the grave was erected a chapel which for many years was a shrine for the faithful. This chapel, with its additions, remained until 1750, when a church was designed which in beauty of style and solidity of structure has rarely been equaled. The object of the architect was to make the most enduring edifice possible, and still not sacrifice proportion. Louis XV laid the cornerstone of this church in 1764, and in 1790 the edifice was dedicated by the Roman Catholics with great pomp. But the spirit of revolution was at work, and in 1 year after, a mob sacked this beautiful building, burned its pews, destroyed its altar, and wrought havoc with its ecclesiastical furniture. The convention converted the structure into a memorial temple, inscribing on its front the words, "Au grand homme la patrie reconnaissante," and they named the building the Pantheon. In 1806, the Catholics had gotten such influence with the government that the building was restored to them. After the Revolution of 1830, the Church of St. Genevieve was again taken from the priests. It was held until 1851, when the Romanists in the Assembly succeeded in having it again reconsecrated. In the meantime, many of the great men of France had been buried there. The first interment in the Pantheon was Mirabeau. Next came Marat, stabbed while in the bath by Charlotte Corday. Both bodies were removed by order of the Convention when the church was given back to Rome. In the Pantheon, the visitor now sees the elaborate tombs of Voltaire and Rousseau. In the dim twilight, he reads the glowing inscriptions, and from the tomb of Rousseau he sees the hand thrust forth bearing a torch, but the bones of these men are not here. While robed priests chanted the litany as the great organ pealed and swinging censers gave off their perfume, visitors came, bringing children, and they stopped at the arches where Rousseau and Voltaire slept side by side, and they said, "It is here." And so the dust of infidel greatness seemed to interfere with the rites. A change was made. Let Victor Hugo tell, one night in May 1814, about 2 o'clock in the morning, a cab stopped near the city gate of La Gare at an opening in a board fence. This fence surrounded a large, vacant piece of ground belonging to the city of Paris. The cab had come from the Pantheon, and the coachman had been ordered to take the most deserted streets. 3 men alighted from the cab and crawled into the enclosure. 2 carried a sack between them. Other men, some in cassocks, awaited them. They proceeded towards a hole dug in the middle of the field. At the bottom of the hole was quicklime. These men said nothing. They had no lanterns. The wan daybreak gave a ghastly light. The sack was opened. It was full of bones. These were the bones of Jean-Jacques and of Voltaire, which had been withdrawn from the Pantheon. The mouth of the sack was brought close to the hole, and the bones rattled down into that black pit. The 2 skulls struck against each other. A spark, not likely to be seen by those standing near, was doubtless exchanged between the head that made the philosophical dictionary and the head that made the social contract. When that was done, when the sack was shaken, when Voltaire and Rousseau had been emptied into that hole, a digger seized a spade, threw into the opening the heap of earth, and filled up the grave. The others stamped with their feet upon the ground, so as to remove from it the appearance of having been freshly disturbed. One of the assistants took for his trouble the sack, as the hangman takes the clothing of his victim. They left the enclosure, got into the cab without saying a word, and hastily, before the sun had risen, these men got away. The ashes of the man who wrote these vivid words now rest next to the empty tombs of Voltaire and Rousseau. But a step away is the grave of Sadi Carnot. When the visitor is conducted to the crypt of the Pantheon, he is first taken to the tomb of Victor Hugo. The sarcophagus on each side is draped with the red, white, and blue of France, and the stars and stripes of America. With uncovered heads, we behold the mass of flowers and wreaths, and our minds go back to 1885, when the body of the chief citizen of Paris lay in state at the Pantheon, and 500,000 people passed by and laid the tribute of silence or of tears on his bier. The Pantheon is now given over as a memorial to the men of France who have enriched the world with their lives. Over the portals of this beautiful temple are the words Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité. Across its floors of rarest mosaic echo only the feet of pilgrims and those of the courteous and kindly old soldiers who have the place in charge. On the walls, color revels in beautiful paintings, and in the niches and on the pedestals is marble that speaks of greatness which lives in lives made better. The history of the Pantheon is one of strife. As late as 1870, the Commune made it a stronghold, and the streets on every side were called upon to contribute their paving stones for a barricade. Yet it seems meet that Victor Hugo's dust should lie here amid the scenes he loved and knew, and where he struggled, worked, toiled, achieved, from whence he was banished and to which he returned in triumph, to receive at last the complete approbation so long withheld. Certainly not in the quiet of a mossy graveyard, nor in a church where priests mumble unmeaning words at fixed times, nor yet alone on the mountainside, for he chafed at solitude, but he should have been buried at sea. In the midst of storm and driving sleet at midnight, the sails should have been lowered, the great engines stopped, and with no requiem but the sobbing of the night wind and the sighing of the breeze through the shrouds, and the moaning of the waves as they surged about the great black ship, the plank should have been run out, and the body wrapped in the red, white, and blue of the Republic. The sea, the infinite mother of all, beloved and sung by him, should have taken his tired form to her arms, and there he would rest. If not this, then the Pantheon. W. M. Wordsworth. Even such a shell, the universe itself, is to the ear of faith. And there are times, I doubt not, when to you it doth impart authentic tidings of invisible things, of ebb and flow and ever-during power, and central peace subsisting at the heart of endless agitation. Here you stand, adore and worship when you know it not, pious beyond the intention of your thought, devout above the meaning of your will. Wordsworth. William Wordsworth. Someone has told us that heaven is not a place but a condition of mind, and it is possible that he is right. But if heaven is a place, surely it is not unlike Grasmere. Such loveliness of landscape, such sylvan stretches of crystal water, peace and quiet and rest. Great green hills lift their heads to the skies, and all the old stone walls and hedgerows are covered with trailing vines and blooming flowers. The air is rich with song of birds, sweet with perfume, and the blossoms gaily shower their petals on the passer-by. Overhead, white, billowy clouds float lazily over their background of ethereal blue. Cool June breezes fan the cheek. Distant knolls are dotted with flocks of sheep, whose bells tinkle dreamily, and drowsy hum of beetle makes the bass, while lark song forms the air of the sweet symphony that nature plays. Such was Grasmere as I first saw it. To love the plain, homely, common, simple things of earth, of these to sing, to make the familiar beautiful and the commonplace enchanting, to cause each bush to burn with the actual presence of the living God. This is the poet's office. And if the poet lives near Grasmere, his task does not seem difficult. From 1799 to 1808, Wordsworth lived at Dove Cottage. Thanks to a few earnest souls, the place is now secured to the people of England and the lovers of poetry, wherever they may be. A good old woman has charge of the cottage, and for a slight fee shows you the house and garden and little orchard and objects of interest, all the while talking, and you are glad, for although unlettered, she is reverent and honest. She was born here, and all she knows is Wordsworth and the people and the things he loved. Is not this enough? Here Wordsworth lived before anything he wrote was published in book form. Here his best work was done, and here Dorothy, splendid, sympathetic Dorothy, was inspiration, critic, friend. But who inspired Dorothy? Coleridge perhaps more than all others, and we know somewhat of their relationship as told in Dorothy's diary. There is a little Wordsworth library in Dove Cottage, and I sat at the window of De Quincey's room and read for an hour, says Dorothy. Sat until 4 o'clock reading dear Coleridge's letters. We paced the garden until moonrise at 1 o'clock. We three, brother, Coleridge and I. I read Spenser to him aloud, and then we had a midnight tea. Here, in this little terraced garden, behind the stone cottage with its low ceilings and wide window seats and little diamond panes, she in her misery wrote, "Oh, the pity of it all! Yet there is recompense. Every sight reminds me of Coleridge, dear, dear fellow, of our walks and talks by day and night, of all the bright and witty and sad sweet things of which we spoke and read. I was melancholy and could not talk, and at last I eased my heart by weeping." Alas, too often there is competition between brother and sister, then follow misunderstandings. But here the brotherly and sisterly love stands out clear and strong after these 100 years have passed, and we contemplate it with delight. Was ever woman more honestly and better praised than Dorothy? The blessings of my later years were with me when I was a boy. She gave me eyes, she gave me ears, and humble cares and gentle fears, a heart, the fountain of sweet tears, and love and thought and joy. And she hath smiles to earth unknown, smiles that with motion of their own do spread and sink and rise, that come and go with endless play, and ever as they pass away are hidden in her eyes. And so, in a dozen or more poems, we see Dorothy reflected. She was the steel on which he tried his flint. Everything he wrote was read to her. Then she read it alone, balancing the sentences in the delicate scales of her womanly judgment. Heart of my heart, is this well done? When she said, "This will do," it was no matter who said otherwise. Back of the house on the rising hillside is the little garden. Hewn out of the solid rock is Dorothy's seat. There I rested while Mrs. Dixon discoursed of poet lore, and told me of how many times Coleridge and Dorothy had sat in the same seat and watched the stars. Then I drank from the well, which is more properly a spring. The stones that curb it were placed in their present position by the hand that wrote the prelude. Above the garden is the orchard, where the green linnet still sings, for the birds never grow old. There, too, are the circling swallows, and in a snug little alcove of the cottage you can read The Butterfly from a first edition, and then you can go sit in the orchard, white with blossoms, and see the butterflies that suggested the poem. And if your eye is good, you can discover down by the lakeside the daffodils, and listen the while to the cuckoo call. Then, in the orchard, you can see not only the daisy, but many of them. And if you wish, Mrs. Dixon will let you dig a bunch of the daisies to take back to America. And if you do, I hope that yours will prosper as have mine, and that Wordsworth's flowers, like Wordsworth's verse, will gladden your heart when the blue sky of your life threatens to be o'ercast with grey. Here Southey came, and Thalaber was read aloud in this little garden. Here, too, came Clarkson, the man with a fine feminine carelessness. As Dorothy said, Charles Lloyd sat here and discoursed with William Calvert. Sir George Beaumont forgot his title and rapped often at the quaint, hinged door. An artist was Beaumont, but his best picture, they say, is not equal to the lines that Wordsworth wrote about it. Sir George was not only a gentleman, according to law, but one in heart, for he was a friend, kind, gentle, and generous. With such a friend, Wordsworth was rich indeed. But perhaps the friends we have are only our other selves, and we get what we deserve. We must not forget the kindly face of Humphrey Davy, whose gracious playfulness was ever a charm to the Wordsworths. The safety lamp was then only an unspoken word, and perhaps few foresaw the sweetness and light that these two men would yet give to earth. Walter Scott and his wife came to Dove Cottage in 1805. He did not bring his title, for it, like Humphrey Davy's, was as yet unpacked down in London town. They slept in the little cubbyhole of a room in the upper southwest corner. One can imagine Dorothy taking Sir Walter's shaving water up to him in the morning, and the savoury smell of breakfast as Mistress Mary poured the tea, while England's future laureate served the toast and eggs. Mr. Scott eating everything in sight and talking a torrent the while about art and philosophy as he passed his cup back, to the consternation of the hostess, whose frugal ways were not used to such ravages of appetite. Of course she did not know that a combined novelist and rimster ate twice as much as a simple poet. Afterwards, Mrs. Scott tucked up her dress, putting on one of Dorothy's aprons, and helped do the dishes. Then Coleridge came over, and they all climbed to the summit of Helm Crag. Shy little De Quincey had read some of Wordsworth's poems, and knew from their flavour that the man who penned them was a noble soul. He came to Grasmere to call on him. He walked past Dove Cottage twice, but his heart failed him, and he went away unannounced. Later he returned and found the occupants as simple folks as himself. Happiness was there, and good society, few books, but fine culture, plain living and high thinking. Wordsworth lived at Rydal Mount for 33 years, yet the sweetest flowers of his life blossomed at Dove Cottage. For difficulty, toil, struggle, obscurity, poverty, mixed with aspiration and ambition, all these were here. Success came later, but this is naught, for the achievement is more than the public acknowledgement of the deed. After Wordsworth moved away, De Quincey rented Dove Cottage and lived in it for 27 years. He acquired a library of more than 5,000 volumes, making bookshelves on 4 sides of the little rooms from floor to ceiling. Some of these shelves still remain. Here he turned night into day and dreamed the dreams of the opium eater. And all these are some of the things that Mrs. Dixon told me on that bright summer day. What if I had heard them before? No difference. Dear old lady, I salute you, and at your feet I lay my gratitude for a day of rare and quiet joy. Farewell, thou little nook of mountain ground, thou rocky corner in the lowest stair of that magnificent temple which does bound one side of our whole vale with gardens rare, sweet garden orchard, eminently fair, the loveliest spot that man has ever found. Farewell. We leave thee to heaven's peaceful care thee, and the cottage which thou dost surround. At places of pleasure and entertainment in the far west are often found functionaries known as bouncers. It is the duty of the bouncer to give hints to objectionable visitors that their presence is not desired, and inasmuch as there are many men who can never take a hint without a kick. The bouncer is a person selected on account of his peculiar fitness, psychic and otherwise. For the place we all have special talents, and these faculties should be used in a manner that will help our fellowmen on their way. My acquaintanceship with the bouncer has been only general, not particular. Yet I have admired him from a distance, and the skill and éclat that he sometimes shows in a professional way has often excited my admiration. In social usages, America borrows constantly from the mother country. But like all borrowing, it seems to be one-sided, for seldom, very, very seldom, in point of etiquette and manners does England borrow from us. Yet there are exceptions. It is a beautiful highway that skirts Lake Windermere and follows up through Ambleside. We get a glimpse of the old home of Harriet Martineau and Foxhowe, the home of Matthew Arnold. Just before Rydal Water is reached comes Rydal Road running straight up the hillside, off from the turnpike. Rydal Mount is the third house up on the left-hand side. I knew the location, for I had read of it many times, and in my pocketbook I carried a picture taken from an old Frank Leslie's showing the house. My heart beat fast as I climbed the hill. To visit the old home of one who was Poet Laureate of England is no small event in the life of a book lover. I was full of poetry and murmured lines from the excursion as I walked. Soon rare old Rydal Mount came in sight among the wealth of green. I stopped and sighed. Yes, Wordsworth lived here for 33 years, and here he died. The spot whereon I then stood had been pressed many times by his feet. I walked slowly with uncovered head and approached the gate. It was locked. I fumbled at the latch, and just as there came a prospect of its opening, a loud, deep, guttural voice dashed over me like a wave. "There, you! Now, what you want?" The owner of this voice was not 10 feet away, but he was standing up close to the wall, and I had not seen him. I was somewhat startled at first. The man did not move. I stepped to one side to get a better view of my interlocutor, and saw him to be a large red man of perhaps 50. A handkerchief was knotted around his thick neck, and he held a heavy hoe in his hand. A genuine beef-eater he was, only he ate too much beef, and the ale he drank was evidently extra XXX. His scowl was so needlessly severe and his manner so belligerent that I, thrice armed, knowing my cause was just, could not restrain a smile. I touched my hat and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Falstaff, you are the bouncer?" "Never mind what I am, sir. Who are you?" "I am a great admirer of Wordsworth." "That's the way they all begins. Can't ye admire him on that side of the wall as well as this?" There is no use of wasting argument with a man of this stamp. Besides that, his question was to the point. But there are several ways of overcoming one's adversary. I began feeling in my pocket for pence. My enemy ceased glaring, stepped up to the locked gate as though he half wished to be friendly, and there was sorrow in his voice. "Don't tempt me, sir. Don't do it. The missus is peeking out of the shutters at us now." "And do you never admit visitors, even to the grounds?" "No, sir, never, God help me. And there's many an honest bob I could turn by it, and no one hurt. But I've lost my place, twist by it. They took me back, though the governor had never forgive me again. 'It's 3 times an out, Mr. Hopkins,' says he, 'only last Whitsuntide.'" "But visitors do come." "Yes, sir, but they never gets in. Mostly mercans. They don't know no better, sir. They picks all the ivy off the outside of the wall, and you sees yourself there's no leaves on the lower branches of that tree, then they carries away so many pebbles from out there that I've to dump in a fresh wheelbarrow full of gravel every week, sir, don't you know?" He thrust a pudgy, freckled hand through the bars of the gate to show that he bore me no ill will, and also, I suppose, to mollify my disappointment. For although I had come too late to see the great poet himself, and had even failed to see the inside of his house, yet I had at least been greeted at the gate by his proxy. I pressed the hand firmly, pocketed a handful of gravel as a memento, then turned and went my way. And all there is to tell about my visit to Rydal Mount is this interview with the bouncer. Wordsworth lived 80 years. His habitation, except for short periods, was never more than a few miles from his birthplace. His education was not extensive, his learning not profound. He lacked humour and passion. In his character there was little personal magnetism, and in his work there is small dramatic power. He travelled more or less and knew humanity, but he did not know man. His experience in so-called practical things was slight, his judgment not accurate, so he lived, quietly, modestly, dreamily. His dust rests in a country churchyard, the grave marked by a simple slab. A gnarled old yew tree stands guard above the grass-grown mound. The nearest railroad is 15 miles away. As a poet, Wordsworth stands in the front rank of the second class. Shelley, Browning, Mrs. Browning, Tennyson far surpass him, and the sweet singer of Michigan, even in uninspired moments, never threw off anything worse than this. And he is lean and he is sick. His body, dwindled and awry, rests upon ankles swollen and thick. His legs are thin and dry. One prop he has, and only one. His wife, an aged woman, lives with him near the waterfall upon the village common. Jove may nod, but when he makes a move, it counts. Yet the influence of Wordsworth upon the thought and feeling of the world has been very great. He himself said, "The young will read my poems and be better for their truth." Many of his lines pass as current coin. "The child is father of the man, the light that never was on land nor sea, not too bright and good for human nature's daily food. Thoughts that do lie too deep for tears, the mighty stream of tendency," and many others. Plain living and high thinking is generally given to Emerson, but he discovered it in Wordsworth, and recognizing it as his own, he took it in a certain book of quotations. The still sad music of humanity is given to Shakespeare, but to equalize matters we sometimes attribute to Wordsworth the old oaken bucket. The men who win are those who correct an abuse. Wordsworth's work was a protest, mild yet firm, against the bombastic and artificial school of the 18th century. Before his day, the timber used by poets consisted of angels, devils, ghosts, gods, onslaught, tourneys, jousts, tempests of hate and torrents of wrath, always, of course, with a very beautiful and very susceptible young lady just around the corner. The women in those days were always young and ever beautiful, but seldom wise and not often good. The men were saints, or else bad, generally bad. Like the cats of Kilkenny, they fought on slight cause. Our young man at Hawkshead School saw this. It pleased him not, and he made a list of the things on which he would write poems. This list includes sunset, moonrise, starlight, mist, brooks, shells, stones, butterflies, moths, swallows, linnets, thrushes, wagoners, babies, bark of trees, leaves, nests, fishes, rushes, leeches, cobwebs, clouds, deer, music, shade, swans, crags, and snow. He kept his vow and went it one better, for among his verses I find the following titles: lines left upon a seat in a yew tree, lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey, to a wounded butterfly, to Dora's portrait, to the cuckoo, on seeing a needlebook made in the shape of a harp, etc. Wordsworth's service to humanity consists in the fact that he has shown us old truth in a new light, and has made plain the close relationship that exists between physical nature and the soul of man. Is this much or little? I think it is much. When we realize that we are a part of all that we see or hear or feel, we are not lonely. But to feel a sense of separation is to feel the chill of death. Wordsworth taught that the earth is the universal mother and that the life of the flower has its source in the same universal life from whence ours is derived. To know this truth is to feel a tenderness, a kindliness, a spirit of fraternalism toward every manifestation of this universal life. No attempt was made to say the last word, only a wish to express the truth that the Spirit of God is manifest on every hand. Now, this is a very simple philosophy. No far-reaching syllogistic logic is required to prove it. No miracle nor special dispensation is needed. You just feel that it is so, that's all, and it gives you peace. Children, foolish folks, old men, whose sands of life are nearly run, comprehend it. But heaven bless you, you can't prove any such foolishness. Geoffrey saw the ridiculousness of these assumptions, and so he declared, "This will never do." And for 20 years, the Edinburgh Review never ceased to fling off fleers and jeers, and to criticize and scoff that a great periodical, rich and influential in the city which was the very center of learning, should go so much out of its way to attack a quiet countryman living in a four-roomed cottage, away off in the hills of Cumberland, seems a little queer. Then this countryman did not seek to found a kingdom, nor to revolutionize society, nor did he force upon the world his patty-pan rhymes about linnets and larks and daffodils. Far from it. He was very modest, diffident in fact, and his song was quite in the minor key, but still the chain shot and bombs of literary warfare were sent hissing in his direction. There is a little story about a certain general who figured as division commander in the War of Secession. This warrior had his headquarters for a time in a typical southern home in the Tennessee mountains. The house had a large fireplace and chimney. In this chimney, swallows had nests. One day, as the great man was busy at his maps, working out a plan of campaign against the enemy, the swallows made quite an uproar. Perhaps some of the eggs were hatching. Anyway, the birds were needlessly noisy in their domestic affairs, and it disturbed the great man. He grew nervous. He called his adjutant. "Sir," said the mighty warrior, "dislodge those damn pests in the chimney without delay." 2 soldiers were ordered to climb the roof and dislodge the enemy. Yet the swallows were not dislodged, for the soldiers could not reach them. So Geoffrey's tirades were unavailing, and Wordsworth was not dislodged. "He might as well try to crush Skiddaw," said Southey.